If you're already a bit of a germaphobe, you may not enjoy today's episode. Because the creepy crawlies are on the march. Bacteria, viruses, insects, even fungi. Some fear this army of pestilence is poised to take over the planet. Are you ready?
This is Signs of the Times Radio with Kent Kingston.
Hey, welcome to Signs of the Times Radio for another week. And here with me in the studio is the author of July's cover story, Julie Hoey. How are you, Julie? Did I pronounce that correctly? Hoey?
You did. Hoey is perfectly right, yes.
Excellent.
And I'm not too bad. I do have a cold, but otherwise I'm fine.
That's actually quite ironic because the title of your article is a very scary large green pestilence, superbugs, plagues, and humanity's future. And you've brought a pestilence into the studio with you today. Is this a show and tell opportunity?
Exactly, that's right. I thought I would stick with the theme.
Now, Julie, you're a high school teacher in the Hunter Valley region of New South Wales. Is that right?
Yes, I'm actually a teacher librarian now, so my specialty is looking at research and finding our way through the plethora of information that's around. But my background is in science and maths teaching, and I was also once a dietitian.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you really have a well-rounded sort of view of the sciences, the practical, the theoretical, and the applied.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds really good. Now, it's really, I guess, interesting that we are looking, or that your article does look at this whole issue of infectious diseases, because it seems like they've kind of fallen off the radar a little bit, because for the last several decades, maybe even a century now, it seems that we're not sort of talking about smallpox and measles and polio and that sort of stuff anymore. It's kind of been dealt with in the West, at least. And instead now we have this whole range of lifestyle diseases, the cardiac disease and stroke and diabetes and all these sorts of things that we often, bring on ourselves because of our lifestyle choices and our, sit in the car, sit in the office, we're very sedentary. But you, in this article, sort of telling us that, hey, infectious diseases are still an issue. They need our attention. Why is that?
Yes, that's the thing. Infectious diseases, particularly in developed countries, we did think we kind of had them knocked on the head and dealt with. But that's not quite the case. And particularly the problem is that obviously in other countries where they haven't had the same funding as us and the same public health initiatives and the same ability to really get into the whole population, infectious diseases and the traditional infectious diseases that we thought we had dealt with, they weren't really properly dealt with. And with the increase in things like travel, that so many people now are travelling, just imagine the thousands of planes full of people that are travelling every day. They're moving these diseases around the world much more quickly than they ever used to be able to. And our populations have increased as well massively. The people that are bringing infectious diseases back across borders are bringing them into highly populated areas where they can very quickly spread if they're highly contagious, which some of these diseases are.
Yeah, and I guess when you say that, I mean, a few years back we actually crossed this line where now 50% of the world's population lives in cities. So it's not only that there are more people on the planet, it's also that more of us are living in close quarters to one another, which of course is a hotbed for contagion.
Exactly. And one of the diseases that we're concerned about these days is measles. That's becoming, getting a little bit of a foothold back in Australia, in America, in places like that where we really should have been able to get rid of it completely. And every time you hear an alert, there's been 2 alerts in the past week in New South Wales about people who've come back from overseas travel infected with measles, and they list all the places that those people went and spent time before they realised they were infectious. And it's all these shopping centres and places where there's just thousands of people. So, that's one of the big causes, one of the big contributing factors is just population issues and travel.
Yeah, and I guess things like tuberculosis or malaria we often see as very much developing world sort of diseases, but I guess we have to watch out for those things, perhaps more than we think we do sometimes.
Yeah, particularly something like malaria. We're seeing changes in climate and the spread of climatic conditions that favour the mosquitoes that spread malaria. So those mosquitoes and malaria is moving into regions that we haven't previously seen them. And, in Australia, we haven't really had to think a lot about malaria, but it is probably, something that we're going to need to pay more attention to. We do have mosquito-borne illnesses within Australia, and it's just climatic conditions are contributing to the spread of those sort of illnesses.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I mean, I lived in Cairns for 4 years, and dengue fever is sort of a constant sort of issue that is in people's minds there. And we knew when we were there that we had to sort of get around our backyard and get rid of any little reservoirs of water that might harbour mosquito larvae and that sort of thing. They've got a whole tropical health unit there that's looking at this all the time. But the climate change thing, that is really strange. So what you're saying is, I mean, a lot of these diseases historically have been confined to sort of equatorial, sort of tropical kind of areas. But now with global warming, the influence of those tropics is coming, I guess, in our part of the world further south, or in the northern hemisphere further north. So that's what you're saying. So diseases that used to be in the tropics are now moving towards more moderate sort of climates.
Yeah, and certainly the other way that they're moving is up into the highlands more. So I lived in Papua New Guinea for a while. And when I was living in Papua New Guinea, I was in the highlands. And while I lived up there, I knew that I didn't need to worry about malaria. I didn't need to take any tablets. I didn't need to cover up or wear mosquito repellent or anything like that.
Because the altitude is higher and therefore the weather's cooler.
It's
usually.
Cooler, that's right. But what we're seeing in, particularly in some of the Asian and African countries, is that malaria is moving up into the cooler highland regions. So yeah, it's kind of moving in all sorts of different directions.
Wow, okay. So I guess in the same way that we see sort of cane toads
exactly
spreading.
Exactly.
Yeah, wow, okay. The issue that you focus on in your article, though, is the issue of what are being called superbugs. Can you tell us about that? Just give us a sort of a layperson's introduction.
Yeah, so a superbug is generally a bacteria. It could be a virus, but we focus on bacteria because we have these wonderful things called antibiotics that kill bacteria. And when we get an infection, we take antibiotics that kill the bacteria and cure our infection. But what we've obviously found is that there are some bacteria that have become resistant to the antibiotics we've used against them. So we go to the next level and then we go to the next level and so on. There are some bacteria that we have run out of antibiotics that work on them. And if you become infected by those bacteria that are resistant to the appropriate antibiotic, it's really, really hard to control the infection, and people, they lose toes and limbs and things because of those infections.
That's horrific. Now, Julie, we did manage very happily to sidestep the whole vaccination debate when you were talking about measles and things, but I think there's another hot button sort of topic here, and that's when we're talking about how these superbugs develop, because I guess the language we often hear in mainstream communication from scientists and in the mainstream media is that these organisms are adapting or they're evolving. This is sort of language that we're using. I wonder though, is this really evolution happening, or is it that there is a diverse population of bacteria there already, and when you apply the antibiotic, it kills, say, the 99% of that population, which is not resistant to that antibiotic, but that 1%, which before was a small minority, then becomes the only bacteria there is. So it's not as a population, it adapts, absolutely, but that's not the same thing as evolution, is it? I mean, you're a science teacher. I don't know how much you've got into this.
Yeah, so there are a few different elements to what allows a bacteria to become a superbug and to become resistant. And it's definitely true that within a population you may have, limited number of individuals that have an innate resistance to the antibiotic. They're the ones that survive. They go on to produce the next population that is then resistant to the antibiotic. So that is one of the mechanisms. The interesting thing is that in bacteria, their genetic material is coded on RNA, which is similar to but different to DNA. Obviously, DNA is double helix. We probably all know that. We've seen lots of pictures of the diagrams and that sort of thing.
A double helix for us normal people is a twisted ladder.
That's right. Yeah. Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Twisted ladder, that's right. RNA is a little bit different to that. It's just one big long kind of circle, although it's all kind of messed up like spaghetti inside the cell.
Yep.
But another really big difference between them is that DNA, when it's replicating, has a checking and correcting process. So it checks for mistakes as it's replicating itself, and if it finds a mistake, it fixes it. Whereas RNA doesn't really have that ability. So bacteria, when they replicate, they actually are prone to a lot more mistakes and mutations. And as we know, most mutations are not beneficial in any way, but they definitely do have a massive capacity for changes to their genetic material because they don't have that checking and correcting process. The other thing to do with bacteria is that sometimes parts of their genetic material can sort of become separated from the main molecule. And so you've got these little tiny parts of the RNA in the cell but separate. They're called plasmids. I don't think I said that very clearly. And they actually can be transferred across from one bacteria to another, to a neighbouring bacteria. So they can potentially share beneficial genes with the current population rather than waiting for that to trickle down into the future populations.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so that
They're
actually
incredibly adaptable, aren't they?
Just really fascinating for such small, simple, very uncomplicated organisms compared to how complex we are.
Yep.
Yeah, that is just incredible.
Yeah, you have a really interesting quote in your article that's where someone says it's insects and bacteria that rule the world, and I guess we can understand why when we see these incredible.
They're just so tenacious.
Yeah, wow. And I mean, we've got a little info box in the article that actually says that suggests that we also have antibiotic resistant fungus as well, which is pretty crazy. So it's not only bacteria that could fall into this sort of superbug category. So in a hospital or a medical setting, I mean, you retell this incredible story about Matthew Ames in your article. What's the impact of superbugs?
Well, I guess the thing with Matthew Ames is that the bacteria that caused his problems, and he lost all 4 of his limbs in an effort to save his life, which miraculously worked. The bacteria that infected him actually wasn't a superbug. It was a bacteria that could have very easily been treated with penicillin or amoxicillin, but it just wasn't recognised in time that that's what was going on with him and that's the issue that he had. So it just got a foothold. It released toxins into the bloodstream. The blood cells were damaged and ineffective, so these body organs weren't getting oxygen, so they started dying, releasing more toxins into the bloodstream and so on. So it really set up a cascade of events that was very difficult to arrest, and he was quite lucky to have survived. In a hospital setting though, people are already sick, their immunity is quite often low, you've got all sick people around you and with all those sick people around you, hospitals are very careful about hygiene. There's lots of cleanliness and lots of antibiotic use and all that sort of thing. So you do tend to get a lot of this antibiotic-resistant bacteria producing because they're so exposed to it. Those that survive are the ones that are resistant.
Is another factor, Julie, the fact that hospitals are incredibly disinfected places. And that, I mean, as we were saying before about bacteria, if you are constantly wiping out all the bacteria over and over again with disinfectants, that tiny little population that may be resistant is actually encouraged in that setting. Is our focus on hospital hygiene possibly backfiring in some ways in creating these superbugs?
Yes, to some extent, that's exactly what it is. It's not just the hospital use of antibiotics, but definitely the hospital cleanliness and hygiene. Having said that, I was listening to a podcast just a couple of days ago about a situation at John Hunter Hospital up in Newcastle where they actually couldn't get hold of their regular antibiotics. There was some sort of a production issue, and so they had to use a different antibiotic that was similar, and they felt that it would probably do the same job. I think it was maybe not as broad spectrum. And what they found was that while they were using that, they had a massive reduction in people getting infected with antibiotic-resistant infections.
So just by mixing it up a bit, having a bit of this and a bit of that, you can sort of outsmart the bacteria in some ways and sort of hit them from all directions.
Yeah, I think part of what was happening was maybe what they were generally using was quite a broad spectrum antibiotic, and so it actually knocks out all your good bacteria as well as, it sort of knocks everything out. And it actually made me think of a verse in the Bible where it says, if you clean out someone's life or clean out a home or whatever and don't replace it with anything, it's just left empty for other bad things to come in.
It's a power vacuum, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a bacteria vacuum, and you sort of knock everything out and it's just a big empty space waiting to be reinfected or repopulated. So, but one of the things that they mention in that podcast, one of the two big issues that we have in hospitals, one is MRSA, which is methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, or golden staph is what most people know it.
Yep.
And they've made significant inroads into arresting that issue just by hand-washing protocols, which I was really surprised to hear, because we've known the importance of hand-washing, and hand-washing has been something that's really big in hospitals for decades.
That's like Florence Nightingale in the Crimean War in, what was that, the early 1900s?
Exactly.
Wow.
But they've obviously, made some improvements and tweaked the hand-washing protocols and have made significant inroads. So even though one part of it is that we're over-hygienic and overuse of antibiotics, on the other hand, just simple things like making sure we're washing hands properly and enough has made a significant impact.
Yeah. Looking globally, Julie, I mean, we have seen in the last few decades, we've seen some nasty Ebola outbreaks. We've seen the H1N1, what was that, the bird flu virus. Am I missing some?
Zika.
Zika, of course. Yeah. And that's another mosquito-borne disease. That was in South America mainly. But yeah, so this is a global issue, isn't it? It's not just an issue in hospitals. This has been an issue among populations. Is this a concern for public health authorities worldwide?
Yeah, the World Health Organization definitely recognises these sorts of bacterial and insect-borne illnesses as serious health problems. The Ebola outbreak that hit the news a few years ago was a really big one. Ebola's actually been out there, and there have been outbreaks for a couple of decades at least, but just small outbreaks every now and then. The one that hit the news was a massive one. There was about 28,000 cases. And
around 11,000 people died, yeah?
Yeah, and
horrific.
There's a current Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and they're not getting under control as quickly as they'd like to, but it's not, it's not massive like the last one, so we're not really hearing about it very much. But
they're having a war. I mean, they've got a refugee crisis there. It's a really complicated situation in the DRC right now. So I imagine that wouldn't help the situation at all.
And that's exactly what we do see, where we see these sort of problems. Most of the time it's in, poor countries that don't have the kind of resourcing and public health efforts that we have. And, complicated by all sorts of issues like war, poverty, climate, all those sorts of things. So it's something we can't afford to let fall off our radar. What happens in those sort of countries does ultimately come back, more and more. It's coming back to affect ourselves.
Yeah, we're all connected, aren't we? Yeah.
Yeah, with all that travel and everything going on.
Wow. So, I mean, I guess the temptation would be to look at all this stuff and say, oh my goodness, the bugs are winning. It's all over for humanity, and to sort of feel hopeless. Can you relate to that? And do you see as there being any kind of solution or a light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, it can be very overwhelming if you focus on all that's going wrong and how tenacious these little creatures are. It can seem very bleak. There's a quote in the article. A journalist, Brian Calvert, said that when he realised what we've done to the earth and how different things that we've done have actually created these problems, that he felt sad and guilt and mourning for a loss yet to come. And it can be very easy to feel hopeless and overwhelmed and like there's nothing we can do. I think there is cause for hope, though, from a few different perspectives.
Yeah, tell us about that.
So certainly from a biblical perspective, the Bible, there's a very strong theme throughout the Bible that there are better times coming, and there will be a time when everything is put right. The Bible in Revelation and in other places in the New Testament talks about the new earth where there will be no pain, no death, no sorrow, no crying.
And I mean, the Bible also warns us that, hey, the world is headed for some tough times. I mean, that's where we got the title of our article from, Pestilence. The King James Version of the Bible, reading through Matthew 24, the signs of the end, or the signs of the times, as we like to say, points to pestilence as being one of these possible sort of disasters. But as you say, the Bible says, hey, that's not the end of the story. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Yeah,
and I think just having that there in the Bible in some ways is comforting, that you say, well, the Bible said these sort of things were going to happen. So that's good. We're on track to the right end.
It's not unexpected either. It's not like, oh my goodness, this came out of left field. Yeah.
Exactly, that's right. I probably just have to mention here one thing that I always think about is the Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat production, which has a song in it where they say, "Don't give up, Joseph, fight till you drop. We read the book and you come out on top." And I always think about that in terms of the Bible, that we've read the book and we know that we come out on top. We know that everything is going to be okay in the end. And that just gives us an underlying hope. It gives us a worldview that says, yes, we expect that this is going to happen, but we know ultimately there's going to be a good ending.
I mean, sometimes, I guess, Christians in particular are accused of an attitude, hey, the whole world is going to hell in a handbasket. Let's just dig ourselves a concrete bunker, fill it full of canned goods. We'll just sort of huddle down there and wait for all these disasters to pass. Maybe even, help a little with helping it along now and again by, using up more of the world's resources and trashing the planet. I don't get the sense that's your perspective.
Yeah, no. In Genesis, it talks about God creating the earth and actually asking us to rule over the earth. And when scholars look at that and interpret it, they generally say that was God asking us to be wise custodians. He wanted us to look after the earth. And in Revelation, there's a verse where God is called upon to destroy those who have destroyed the earth.
Wow.
And when Jesus was on earth, he did his best to help people and do good.
Including people with sicknesses and infections.
That's right, the leprosy and things like that. So the example that he set and the verses that are in the Bible definitely don't suggest that we should just sit back and wait it out, and definitely that we shouldn't be contributing to it any more than we can help.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so definitely from a Christian point of view, we should be making efforts to help the situation and to help individuals who are suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you said there's hope at a number of different levels. The first one is biblical. You've covered that pretty well. What are the other levels?
I think there is a lot of scientific research going on and a lot of scientific and medical efforts at dealing and tackling these problems. People are coming up with really novel ways of approaching things. There is a push to try and discover new antibiotics. They keep saying, we haven't discovered or created any new antibiotics in over 30 years. But there are also people coming at it from different directions. So even just this morning I read an article about some researchers who have discovered some old medicines that were used in World War II. And I can't even remember what they were used for. They weren't specifically used as antibiotics, and they're not antibiotics. But what they're saying is they help to manage the symptoms that I think they were particularly talking about influenza, looking at the current flu problem.
And flu we sometimes think flu is no big deal, but I think we forget that in 1918, about up to 100 million people, died of the Spanish flu. That was an incredible epidemic. It can be horrific.
Yeah, and our current flu season is really, ringing a lot of alarm bells. There are healthy people dying who are not, old and already facing health issues, or not really young with very immature immune systems. There are healthy teenagers getting the flu and dying, and that is very scary. So we definitely, you're right, we can't be complacent about things like the flu. This medicine that the researchers were looking at was actually just treating the symptoms and the things that the flu does to you that make you die. So rather than trying to get rid of the bacteria, which do eventually, your own immune system does eventually
is bacteria
sort them out.
or a virus, the flu?
That's true, it is a virus, that's right. That's one different angle that they're taking. And there are lots of different angles in terms of scientific research in general that are being taken, that people are looking at different ways of thinking about the problem. So that's, to me, gives me a lot of hope that there really is other ways of thinking about the problem and solving it.
Oh, that's fair enough, Julie. I mean, but I guess you're a science teacher. I'm not, but neither of us are scientific researchers or public health officials. So, are there any practical things that we can do, sort of faced with this invasion from the microscopic world and insects and stuff? Is there anything positive that we can do? Anything practical we can do?
Yeah, so I guess there's things we can do at different levels. On a personal level, if you're trying to keep yourself healthy and really want to keep your immune system boosted, there's 3 things I recommend. And I will just say this is the first time I've been sick in 18 months. But obviously eating well, eating lots of good food that helps to, boost your immune system, and not having lots of unhealthy food that actually drags down your immune system.
Yeah, so whole food, plant-based diet.
Definitely your fruits and veggies and that sort of thing. Yeah. And not having lots of sugary foods, because that kind of drains the store, so to speak.
Yep.
It takes a lot of nutrients to metabolize sugar, and you've then sort of depleting your stores of those nutrients and antioxidants.
This is a qualified nutritionist speaking, people, so listen up.
That's right. The other 2 things that are really significant at boosting your immune system, which people may not realise, one is getting enough sleep, so 7 to 8 hours a night for adults.
Yeah, often overlooked.
Absolutely, and getting inadequate sleep very quickly harms your immune system and depresses it. And the other thing that is really good at boosting your immune system is getting regular exercise. It's just incredible. So just, there's 3 simple things that obviously are good in general, but also boost your immune system. So on a personal point of view, and obviously people can do their own research and decide whether or not they do want to take, multivitamins or supplements of any kind and that sort of thing.
I heard someone on the radio this morning saying celery juice
That's right.
boosts my immunity. It's amazing, and good.
That's right.
Good on her. I mean, at least you're being hydrated, and I imagine that's another good thing. Stay hydrated, keep your system flushing through. That can often deal with a lot of nasties, can't it?
That's right. Yep.
Yep.
Going beyond ourselves and looking outside of our own personal health,
Yeah.
We can obviously do things like financially support efforts to help other people. We may not be in careers or at a stage of our life where we can be making a personal impact, but financially we can support various agencies and organisations, NGOs and things like that.
So agencies that are making a difference in things like an Ebola outbreak or stuff like that. Okay, that's fair enough. I like that.
That's right. There's 2 pillars to the scientific approach, and one pillar is to be really rigorous and hard and look at things. We talk about evidence-based approaches, and we want to look for good, hard evidence and not sort of go running down a road, spending money on things and putting effort and energy into things that haven't been, well researched and have good evidence.
Properly tested, yeah.
That's right.
Sure.
But the other one that I think to some extent is being forgotten, that is actually to have a very open mind to crazy, wild ideas. And I feel in some ways in this day and age there are a lot of loud voices that shout down the crazy, wild ideas. I don't think they should just be accepted because they sound good. They still need to be rigorously tested. But we need to be open to testing some of the crazy, wild ideas.
Yeah, you've got to take them seriously in the first place in order to go to the effort of testing them, don't you?
Well, that's what science is about. It's about looking for answers, and we have many, many examples where the answers have been in places that we didn't expect them to be. And I guess that comes back to what I was mentioning earlier about the human body. There's things we've found out about the way our body works and stuff that's going on in there, even in terms of the bacteria in our intestines and how that, they produce fatty acids that are important for our brain development, for young children's brain development.
Yeah,
who would have ever thought that the bacteria inside our intestines was important to a child's brain developing properly?
Well, I mean, they always say that a way to a man's heart is through his stomach, so I guess that's a similar idea.
Yeah, that's right.
The way for a healthier brain is also through your stomach and gut, perhaps.
Exactly, because eating the right kind of food encourages the right kind of bacteria.
Yeah.
But, that's just one example of how there are just incredible things out there that we would never have imagined. And we need to be open to the fact. And, I really encourage young people who are maybe interested in science or even not yet interested in science to, have that hope and say, I might be able to make a difference. I can go into a science career, into a medical career, and I might be able to make a big difference.
Wow. Oh, that's fantastic, Julie. Look, you've given us a lot to think about today, and a lot of things to perhaps, check out and Google from reputable sources only. Because there is a lot of sort of, I guess, speculation out there, isn't there? A lot of people who sound dead certain about things they really don't know a whole lot about. But no, I really appreciate you coming in and sharing with us on Signs of the Times Radio.
I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for the opportunity.
Today's episode was based on an article appearing in this month's Signs of the Times magazine. A subscription is just $26 for 11 issues a year. To find out more, visit signsofthetimes.org.au. Signs of the Times has been published in Australia since 1886 and is proudly produced by Adventist Media.
This is an Adventist Media podcast.